On January 24th, 2023, Brendan Urie announced that Panic at the Disco was officially ending. Most of the reactions to this were relatively positive, as Brendan Urie's reputation had gone down the drain over the past few years. I personally was never a huge Panic fan, so I didn't dwell on the news any further. Until a couple of days ago, as of recording this, I stumbled upon BandPrevail's rise and fall videos about Panic at the Disco. They went over the history of the band, and I would highly recommend watching them if you want an overview of their career. While watching these videos, I realized I had really only listened to one Panic album in full, being Vices and Virtues. I figured since the band/solo project was done making music, I can officially go through all of the albums without having to worry about my video becoming outdated anytime soon. I'm also just genuinely curious to listen to the artistic evolution and journey that the band goes through. So now I'm going to go through each of these albums, giving my favorite and least favorite songs, as well as just my overall thoughts. So, without further ado, let's just get into it. For Panic at the Disco's first album, it's fairly solid. It has a unique sound that I personally really enjoyed. I will say that I found the first half of the album lacking compared to the second half, especially with the opening track Introduction starting it off. It just felt like an unneeded add-on, especially when the first actual song off the album, the only difference between Martyrdom and Suicide is press coverage, is a much better start, especially since one of the lyrics in the chorus mentions prologues. Also, a quick note, the long names each song has is just super weird and annoying for me, especially when typing the script. I had to wait to watch the song names scroll along on Apple Music for me to be able to see the full thing just to type it out. Most of the songs I didn't care for that much were the ones with the longer names. I'm not going to mention them just because typing them out for the script is far too much work that I just don't feel like doing. Anyways, to continue on with the tracks I didn't like, the robotic vocal effect that appeared on the verses throughout Nails for Breakfast, Tax for Snacks was just super annoying and grating. It also sticks out like a sore thumb on the album since this auto-tune-like effect appears nowhere else. It also just doesn't mesh well with the overall sound of the album. I constantly thank God for Esteban has a similar issue where the instrumental just doesn't fit with the vocals at all. There's also just far too much going on with the instrumental, and it makes the song sound like a headache. The only other track I disliked was Intermission. I loved it at first and was bopping along to it, but then there was a sudden stop for Brendan Urie to say something, and then some calm classical music started playing instead. This track isn't necessarily bad, but the first part was so good compared to the rest of it that I ended up more disappointed than anything. Now, there were quite a few tracks from the album that I overall enjoyed. Time to Dance lives up to its name and truly makes me want to get up and dance around. A track I found severely underrated is But It's Better Than You Do, which I found to be my favorite song off of the album. Not only is the instrumental fun, but it's one of the few songs where you can understand everything Brendan Urie is singing. Also, the outro gives such a good transition into I Write Sins Not Tragedies, and I feel like I don't have to go into too much detail on I Write Sins Not Tragedies since we all know it's a bop. The final song I took positive note of was There's a Good Reason These Tables Are Numbered, Honey, You Just Haven't Thought of It Yet, due to its fun melodies and the creative instrumental that has two pianos on top of each other. It's hard to make piano on piano sound good with each other, but they made it work. The only thing holding this song down is just how long its name is. It's basically 2 sentences long. Overall, I found A Fever You Can't Sweat Out to be a pretty standard album. It's got some bops and some flops, but thankfully it's a pretty short listen, hitting at exactly 40 minutes. Though the first half of the album is somewhat lacking, the second half more than makes up for it. Although I will say I found the final song rather anticlimactic. It made the album end at a screeching halt rather than closing it up and wrapping it with a bow. It's like if on Christmas morning, instead of opening a wrapped present, Santa just chucked a plastic toy truck straight at your face and ran off. Personally speaking, I would take the pretty out of the name of this album because it wasn't pretty. There was a lot of whiplash in between each song, and they would go from alternative to country, back to alternative to folk. There wasn't a set genre for the album, which made it an odd listen. Also, the songs on this album are way too long. For example, Northern Downpour spends the back half of the song a full 2 minutes just repeating the same 2 lines over and over again. As you can imagine, this was very annoying. Do You Know What I'm Seeing has the same exact problem, with Brendan Urie constantly repeating that he never gave a damn about the weather. Both of these songs dragged on for far too long for no reason. Also, the piano knows something I did not need an entire intro and outro to sing about Brendan Urie not shaving his hair. Since I'm on the subject of bad songs, I feel I should mention what I thought to be the worst song off of the album. We're So Starving. If fan service was a song, it would be this one. It's just the band singing about how they've made new music and you're about to listen to it. Like, yeah, that's why there's an album out. And this album came out at the time of physical releases, so it makes the purpose even weirder to me. Like, you go out, you buy the album because you're ready to hear the new music, and the first new song that plays is about how you have new music. A horrible attempt at a build up to the album because of how bland it was. There were some things I liked about this album, such as the song I, Friends, and Holy Spaces, which served as a great intermission. It sounded sweet and definitely took a lot of inspiration from country and folk. In fact, the best songs on this album were the ones that were inspired by country. Another good one was Pas de Cheval, I hope I'm saying that right, which has wonderful guitar and bass. The other countryist song I loved was Folkin' Around. It's super fun to listen to, and one thing these songs all had in common was that they were all relatively short, all being under 3 minutes each. My favorite songs off of the album were the ones that weren't stretched out, the ones that I didn't feel like I was ready to finish within a minute before they were done. And while a minute doesn't sound like a long time, it is when listening to a song. It can feel like forever when it's a third of 3 minutes. So it's not a surprise to me that this is Panic's longest album when so many of the songs are unnecessarily long. Finally, I just wanted to say that there were a lot of mentions of the moon in this album, and I don't really know why. I wasn't really able to piece it together, and I don't feel like going back and listening to a bunch of songs I don't like or care about to figure it out. So if someone could explain that to me, that would be absolutely wonderful. So going into this album, I was actually pretty excited because this was the only Panic album I listened to in full, and from what I remembered, it was pretty solid. When the album started with Ballad of Mona Lisa, my memories were immediately validated. It's the best opening of any Panic album so far, with drums so energetic it made me unable to keep still. The vocals and lyrics are also super fun, and it's a song I often listen to. Overall, this album contains absolutely amazing music. There were only 2 songs on this album I didn't like all that much, one of them being Always, which was an okay little ballad. The main reason I don't like it is because after the first 6 songs on the album, which are all amazing and upbeat, it lulls the album from a marathon to a slow morning jog. The album almost comes to a stop for this alright ballad that isn't anything super special. Honestly, Sarah Smiles does everything Always was trying to do, but better. But while Always was just okay, there was Nearly Witches, which was just bad. Not only is there an unneeded and out-of-place intro, the whole song just feels off. It feels like the speedy verses and slow chorus are fighting over the tempo, and the instrumental also just doesn't work with the awkward vocals. Overall, the song is just bad. It was such an awful choice as the last track. If I wasn't listening to the deluxe version that included extra content after it, it would have caused the album to leave a bitter taste in my mouth as I left it. Thankfully, the deluxe version added 2 new songs at the end, with the new album closer being Oh Glory. Well, it's actually the music video for Ballad of Mona Lisa, but I'm not counting that. Anyways, Oh Glory, despite just being a demo track, is one of the best off of the album. It has a trap-like instrumental on the verses that would normally feel out of place in the album, but actually serves as a great build-up to the more fitting punk chorus. It's overall a great song, and I'm happy it managed to be added. Despite the album having a large amount of good songs, a few of them were hindered by their unneeded outros. The past 2 Panic albums both had intermission and introduction tracks that served as a sort of build-up to the next song. Personally, I've never been a fan of these kinds of tracks because they normally don't do a good job of serving their purpose and just feel like filler. Vices and Virtues tries to solve this problem by putting what would normally be an intermission track into a song to serve as its outro. Songs like Hurricane, Ready to Go, and Calendar are all solid songs up until the outro. Now, instead of being able to simply not download the introduction and intermission tracks, I had to sit through an extra 30 seconds of song that hardly matches the track it was tacked onto. The worst part of these outros is that they don't add anything to the song, with all of them sounding like either coffee shop or elevator music. Hurricane and Ready to Go are 2 of my favorite songs from this album, but I hardly find myself choosing to listen to them because I know I'll have to sit through their outros. Sure, I could skip to the end of the song, but I shouldn't have to do that. Even with its issues though, Vice and Virtues is definitely Panic's best album so far by a landslide. Being the follow-up to Pretty Odd made the bar already low for me, but they managed to knock it out of the park. Although there were things about this album I wasn't a huge fan of, I had a blast listening to it. It's an amazing album overall, and I see myself going back to listen to it soon. I'm going to be honest, I wasn't excited to listen to this album, mainly because of its quirky name that came straight out of Tumblr. Also, I wasn't familiar with any of the songs that were on the album. Most of the time I'll look through the track list and see 1 or 2 songs that were on the radio for a bit. This was not one of those albums, or so I thought. As soon as I pressed play, I recognized the first song, This Is Gospel, although I originally thought the song had a different title that pertained more to the chorus. This Is Gospel was a song I had heard plenty of times before. I wasn't expecting it to be the first song I heard, but it was a pleasant surprise. The song rivals Ballad of Mona Lisa as Panic's best opening track. Overall, all the songs are good. There was only one I didn't like, which was The End of All Things. It just felt like a ballad tacked onto the end of the album that didn't really match the overall vibe of it. It was also very forgettable, and it didn't serve as a good close to the album. Besides that, though, there weren't any bad tracks on the album. In fact, this is probably Panic's best album quality-wise so far. Although almost all of the songs are good, I wouldn't call this my favorite Panic album by any means. My main issue with all of the songs is that although they are good, they aren't great. Sure, they all have solid instrumentals and lyrics, but none of them really stood out to me as songs I would choose to go back to in my spare time. They all give off the vibe of a song that I would play on my playlist while I'm in class and I'd vibe to it, but then forget about it once the next song came up. Although I had a fun experience with this album, it was just an okay listen. It's not something I see myself going back to for the full album experience, but I will say that I am excited to see the direction that Panic takes with their next album. Hopefully it's still consistent, but with stronger tracks. This album was such a huge downgrade from the last album. At least Too Weird to Live was consistent in its mediocrity. The only thing this album is consistent in is giving me a headache. From the opening track, I realized that this was the start of Brendan Urie's horrific scream singing era, where he thinks that just because he can sing high, that means he has to in every single song. This doesn't help with the fact that most Panic songs are pretty heavy on their instrumentals, implementing trumpets and other brass instruments alongside your regular drums and guitars. So now not only do you have a full instrumental, you have vocals that are competing with it to make the most noise possible. And this noise isn't even good noise. It's all relatively boring. I ended up zoning out for a good third of the album, and seeing as the album is only 36 minutes, that's a good chunk of the album. Also, one of the songs, Don't Threaten Me with a Good Time, samples Livin' La Vida Loca, and doesn't do anything with the sample. It's literally just used for the intro and then layered on top of the song's normal instrumental. Surprising absolutely no one, it doesn't fit with the song, it just creates more unnecessary noise. I also need to mention Hallelujah, because how on earth does Brendan Urie manage to sound flat on the bridge of his own song? This album for me definitely marks the downfall of Panic in general. Brendan starts the screaming style of singing, the instrumentals become more bombastic, and overall the quality of their albums has just been teetering and is finally starting to fall. While there was a lot about this album I didn't like, it would be unfair of me not to showcase what I liked about the album. LA Divity is one of the more cohesive songs on the album, and I'm not surprised it was used as a single. It's still loud and a bit obnoxious, but it's not as bad as some of the others on the album. The Good, the Bad, and the Dirty also does a good job of balancing its noise, coming out as a banger rather than a banging headache. Finally, House of Memories is a standout song from the album. It's not obnoxious in its sound, and it's the better of the two ballads on the album. The other ballad consisting of Brendan Urie attempting a Frank Sinatra impression, which goes about as well as you would expect, but other than those songs, there wasn't really much I enjoyed about the album. I'm not excited for this next one, but at least there are only two left to go from here. It's the second to last album, and oh my god, I've been putting this off for a week because of how unexcited I am to listen to Panic. I try to go into each album open-minded, but there's only so much hope I can put into these newer releases. I finally got myself to listen to Pray for the Wicked, and yeah, it's a good thing I didn't go in with high hopes. But the album literally starts with a jump scare as the opening for the first track. Fuck a Silver Lining starts off quiet until suddenly a bunch of trumpets start blasting and Brendan Urie comes in and starts yelling out of nowhere. I had to take a minute to recover, but I didn't pause the song, so a good portion of it had passed by the time I was able to even take in what was going on. Also, speaking of Brendan Urie's yelling, it's back. Although not as bad as it was on Death of a Bachelor, it is still there. It is just as grating when it does show up, and there were some songs where it honestly hurt to listen to them. One of these songs was Dying in LA. One thing I've noticed while listening to these albums is that there typically seems to be a random ballad tacked onto the end. Dying in LA is the random ballad of this album. The vocals are grating against the soft instrumental, and the odd melodies that Urie implements just don't sound good and just, pinched my eardrums. Awful. But going through the album, I realized that a good portion of the songs, 4, I think, were released as singles. 3 of them were successful, with one, Dancing's Not a Crime, being the unsuccessful one. But take that with a grain of salt because I'm not completely sure if it was a single, but I do remember hearing it on the radio a good bit, so I'm assuming it was. But it makes sense that it wasn't successful because it's not good. It's another example of Brendan ripping apart his vocal cords and my eardrums alongside a loud and boisterous instrumental. You can use this description for most of the songs on this album, with most of them just not sounding good. Don't get me wrong though, there were some things about this album that I actually enjoyed. First off, Overpass has a great instrumental. I think the best song off of the album was Say Amen Saturday Night because of its great chorus and bridge. Also, the main thing I liked about this album was just how short it was. It's only 34 minutes, so it only took a short part of my day, and it started and ended relatively fast, so not feeling like too much of a drag or a waste of time. Now, I just have one more album to go. Wish me luck. Before I get into this last album, I have a little bit of explaining to do. If you haven't noticed, it's been a couple months since I last uploaded, and that's because I've been putting off listening to this album this whole time. Since I hadn't listened to the album, I couldn't finish the video, but I told myself to suck it up so I could get this video out at the start of my semester. So, did this album live up to the months of horrendous expectations I had built up for it? Absolutely. Although this album is only 44 minutes, it feels like a lifetime. Starting off, the opening notes are just awful. Brendan Urie throughout this entire album is pitchy and basically screams half of his notes. Any songs that had any sort of promise, like Middle of a Breakup and Star Spangled Banner, are ruined because of Urie's vocals. 4 songs into this album, my ears started to hurt, and there are 12 songs in this album. Halfway through listening to it, either the songs all started to blend together or my eardrums burst. And seeing as they are still ringing, it's probably both. I wouldn't be surprised if listening to this album gave me an ear infection. I'm not going to give this album more attention than it deserves, especially since all there really is to say about it is that it's bad. I don't think I've ever hated an album the way I hated this one. But at least now I don't ever have to listen to Panic at the Disco ever again. And after listening to 5 hours of Panic, my listening history is ruined. I'm going to have to binge some Taylor Swift or Hailstorm to fix it up. Also, random tidbit I feel I should mention is that I've seen Brendan Urie live in 2019, but I didn't know what was going on because I didn't know any of the music. I also don't know where to put this in the video, so I'm just putting it here. But anyways, feel free to like and subscribe. I'm trying to upload monthly videos, and I have a few projects I'm already working on, so subscribe so you can see those in the future. Also, leave a comment. It helps me learn what y'all like and what I should make more videos on. Thanks for watching. Corn, signing out.